So, hey, this is Full Stack PowerShell. Y'all ready to go? Cool. First, obligatory thanks to our sponsors. Thank you, Synergy, Chocolatey, Jane Street, DevIT, PatchMyPC, and whoever else is not listed. Second, I think you've all seen some variation of this slide before. Who am I? I'm James from Start Automating, to James Brundage if you want a full name. Pretty prolific programmer. Pretty prolific, I mean I lost count several million lines of code ago. Been doing this for a while. In fact, I was a PowerShell team member between 2006 and 2010, which, you know, nice high watermark in life, I guess. That was PowerShell v2 and v3. That basically was the formative era for the language when it really took shape. I will also be a PowerShell innovator until the day I die. I like basically seeing what I can do with the language and stretching its capabilities and passing the buck forward to everybody else. I like finding amazing things that it can do and sharing them with you. Today we're going to talk about full stack PowerShell, which is a nice buzz phrase around a thing I've been doing for far too long at this point, which is basically PowerShell web development. But first, let's start by defining full stack. Full stack development is one of those vague terms that it gets thrown around with varying degrees of ego often wrapped behind it. If you ask W3C Schools, one of the paragons of internet understanding, it's someone who can write servers, clients, and according to them, SQL. I'm adding or storage. We'll get back to why in a bit. The short version is not everybody uses SQL anymore. If you ask most hiring managers, however, it's the set of tools we use. So we're looking for a full stack developer and LAMP stack. Okay, cool. If I can name that acronym off the top of my head, great. Many developers will say they are full stack, but they often just mean, I know this set of frameworks. If I'm being a little bit more shade throwing, I guess it is Wednesday, it's the day for it, they're very likely to be, well, I can use JavaScript to write a client or a server. Therefore, I am a full stack developer. Let's do a little bit better in our understanding of full stack. That's kind of the bit of the goal today. So what is full stack PowerShell? Full stack is full stack purely in PowerShell. Today we're going to learn how to write a server in pure PowerShell, the web standards that make up modern clients, how to make static sites with PowerShell, how to script SQL and some other storage, very briefly. And you should also actually walk away with an understanding of a real understanding of full stack, like what is going on anytime a request is sent and received. As complicated as this sounds, we're going to try to keep it simple. We're going to learn simple techniques, not how to use tools. This is a thing that I'm trying to do in more and more talks. I can try to convince you to use this cool tool that I've built or that somebody else has built, and you may or may not be able to get managerial approval for that. You might not want everything the tool gives you. So if I teach you techniques, hopefully you'll walk away with something you can actually use flexibly according to your needs, not my impression of your needs. That makes sense? Cool. But we'll get to all that after this cool demo, because you got to have at least one cool demo. Possibly more than one. So I'm going to go grab this from Gist. The cool demo is called There Is No Route Table. We'll get back to what the hell that means in a bit. I'm going to go create a new file. Looks like I don't have VS Code open yet. 1 second. Also wrong talk. Oh, would you look at that? I already have it open. So this is 526 lines of pure PowerShell joy and craziness. And we're going to come back to how it works after we see it running, which will be shortly after terminal decides to boot up. There we go. Cool. We are now serving on this random port. Let's go ahead and open up a browser. Cool demo. So we're actually dynamically generating a CSS color scheme, an SVG graphic, 3D JavaScript, and the frame it's all held in. And we're getting, I would call, somewhat decent response times out of this. I would like to add this caveat. This is a Surface Book 2. This is a old, like 8-year-old laptop. At home, I tend to get responses that are very, very routinely 1 to 2 milliseconds. In fact, actually, it seems like once my box is calming down, I'm getting close to that here now too. Which, I don't know if you've had this problem yet, or you've had this discussion with your managers. Oh, I want to try to do some web stuff in PowerShell. Oh, but PowerShell's too slow. No. Oh, it's not. This is definitely achievable enough for any modern site, especially one that doesn't have millions of users. And I'm sorry, you're not going to be that person. Neither am I. So we're actually going to leave that up. Let that kind of show its response times down below. It's actually getting each of these individual parts of it. And we're going to come back to how it works in a second. But for perf drag bonus points, I'm actually going to leave that running. So there was our cool demo. Generated a page that auto-refreshed, made some CSS to colorize the page, made it an SVG to show off 2D shapes, and added some 3D for good measure. Cool. Visually overwhelming or just about the right amount of trippy? Still trying to figure out what the right wowza demo is for this sort of thing. It is, as we saw, all in about 500 lines of code. And that is considerably larger than it needs to be. In fact, there's probably only about 300 lines of that code being demonstrated. We'll get back to that when we dig deeper through it after we talk through a lot more web stuff first. And you can find this basically by looking for just a server without a route table or going to my gist.github.com and finding there is no route table. It's a fun one. But let's go back to simple, because that's going to be a little bit much to digest. Let's start with the simplest server we can kind of possibly imagine. The nuts and bolts are less than 50 lines of code. And this is 50 relatively efficient lines of code. You could write a shorter version still that potentially locks and isn't as quick or resilient in 10 lines of code. I mean, your results may vary. Anybody who wants to play PowerShell Code Golf with this may. All we really need to do is listen for requests. Okay? You know, crazy, right? Then, bear with me, follow me through here, respond to them. That is all that a web server is ever doing or will ever do. In fact, this is true whether this was a HTTP server or not. If I wanted to write a UDP server, I'm listening for requests. I'm responding to them. If I wanted to write a WebSocket server, listening to requests, responding to them. This is just a general technique distilled into its most simple and obvious form. We listen to requests and we respond to them. I'm trying to make it easy, but let's see those basics. Another gist time. I'm going to go close out this window now. Get the raw view of this. Probably inevitably find I've already created this file locally. Control C. No, I'll update VS Code later. Please nobody hack my VS Code while I'm doing this presentation. And I keep putting this in random directories and I'm going to eventually get confused about it, but let's go throw that into event server.ps1 and hit F5. And this is a much simpler server. All it does is return a random number. And because I'm on a laptop with a quiet keyboard, you cannot hear me rapidly hitting Control R, but you can see me doing this, right? Fast enough for you. Certainly tolerable. Let's go back to our console. Now we get those beautiful millisecond or less responses, or a few millisecond responses. No, I don't want your on-screen keyboard. I'm sure you're going to offer it again. This is what I get for touching my screen. I also don't want to express that in emoji. But what I do want to do is prove something crazy. I'm going to put a breakpoint here. I don't think I really kind of highlighted this yet, but one of my favorite parts of this approach is that I can debug it. I might need to restart to debug it. We'll see. Nope, I did not. So if I look, I have my request. I can see the URL the request was sent to. If I wanted to inspect the body there, I could. I am basically paused at this particular web request. So I've got a debuggable web server in 42 lines of code because I still like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and I will take no shame for it. So let's take our breakpoint out, resume. Note that because we were broken, that took a little bit longer than a millisecond to process. But let's walk through how this is actually working. Okay? Going up to the top. First thing we're doing is we're picking a random port to put it on. Now, if I wanted this to actually serve proper content to the internet, from say a Docker container, I could replace localhost with star and pick a fixed port. But demonstration purposes only and maximum security here. So we want to only serve local requests. Sorry, even if you know the IP to my laptop, it will not respond to you trying to hit this page. After we've got that, we create an HTTP listener. This is a built-in .NET type. It is as old as .NET Core, and in fact has been in .NET Non-Core since 3. Which, unfortunately, and we're going to come back to this in a slide, I believe, called Life Regrets, means that we could have done it this way for approximately 16 years. This has always been there, and quite frankly will always be there because there's too much of the operating system that relies upon this sort of capability to throw up a little microservice. Now, the part that won't be there in older versions of PowerShell that makes this extra easy is start thread job, but you could do this in PowerShell 5.1 with background run spaces if you want. I'm not going to demonstrate that here. This thread job takes a few parameters: the main run space, the HTTP listener, and the source identifier. While it's listening, I go get the next request, or the next request context in their parlance. I have this tight little loop to wait for it to be completed. If it didn't work, I write an error. Otherwise, I get the context back. I don't like fave icons. They aren't really used that much anymore, so I just 404 a fave icon request. And then I generate an event in the main run space. Now, raise your hand if you know that PowerShell events are a thing. That's actually more hands than I expected. PowerShell events, though, also are very old. They are from V2. And they are a way to handle any .NET event as well as create your own arbitrary event, which is what we're doing here. We're basically creating an event called HTTP when an HTTP request comes in. Again, we get a request and we respond to it. I'm sorry, it's a basic mantra, but we're going to come back to it. So at this point, we have our server. Our server is running in a background job. More to the point, it's running in a thread job, which means it's running inside of the same process, and any of the information that I sent back from that server, I can just work with. Remember, this thing is only 40 lines long, and we're in line 28. We give that job a name. We pass it the current run space and the listener, and I give it a throttle limit of 50. Although, quite frankly, it uses so few resources, you could probably put about 1,000 of these on a box without too much pain. Then we go ahead and add the listener as a note property, because we might want to tell it to stop later. Just easier than storing that information outside of the job. And then I basically say, hey, I'm serving. Here's a link. And then I create a random number generator in .NET. I could use getRandom. It would be a little bit slower, but at this point we're in our basic server loop. And while the listener is listening, I want to get all HTTP events. I want to pick out the request and response from the event, which I'm sending up here. So here's context, context request, context response, and here's 3 easy variables. If the response already had no output stream, it's responded, it's somehow still in my buffer, I don't want it, I don't care. So I continue. And then I go ahead and say, I'm going to close the response with the bytes of this string. And that's it. I have server. In fact, I can basically start to put anything that I want here. Everybody kind of following along so far? Do you feel like, at the very least, looking at this gist, copying and pasting what you need, you'd be able to create your own server? Cool. Then I, for bonus points, say, hey, here's how quickly I responded, which I already kind of implicitly know because the event has a time generated. So while I would normally get back information just outputting, like, here was the response or the request from the server from my job, it's not going to tell me when that happened. And this gives me a little bit more information about that makes other things like this easier to calculate. So if I want to look at average response time, for instance, I just need to track, now minus the time generated for each of these things. Then I remove the event, and I'm done. And if I didn't remove the event, it really wouldn't matter because it would just rapidly go over this. I guess it would matter because you'd have more and more events to go over. Your performance would slightly degrade. But does everybody kind of understand the simple form of the web server? Are at least a few light bulbs going off in all your heads? Did you think it would be this easy? Is this easy? Cool. Also, I'm just going to put this out there as a public speaker. Nods are great. Vocalizations are better. So is this easy? Cool. So you can judge how much they're enthusiastic from a vocalization. Nods are a lot harder. Let's go back to the PowerPoint now that we've gotten the little cool demo out of the way. Let's choose our own adventure. Basics are indeed, pretty basic. I'm sorry, I'm back to the mantra. We get a request, we send a response. We can go wherever we want from here. Truly. Like, you can build as good or as bad or as complicated or as simple as a web server as you would like. Any way we want to route, we can. Now, I don't think I've explained this concept, but I feel like it is a little self-evident. Obviously, we don't want to just serve a single page from the whole server. We might sometimes something like that for performance reasons, but we would like more than one page that we can serve. I've got a request, what thing do I want to handle it with? That's called routing. Most full stack developers know one stack that has one type of route table, one way to route requests. They learn how to route things in that. They don't really understand what routing is or how it works or how to do cool and interesting stuff with it. We can do whatever the hell we want. Some examples, I can do a route with a switch statement. We all know how powerful switch is in PowerShell, right? Yeah, so let that percolate for a bit. I can just do switch $request URL local path or switch -regex request URL local path. If I wanted to serve multiple servers from a single box, I could also switch on the full URL. Easy, right? So what's a routing? It's just a switch statement. Well, that's one form of easy. You could also route to a hash table or object. I'm actually kind of annoyed because I didn't think of the best simple demo until the drive out here. And obviously that is too late to put it in the slides. And that would be basically a demo of using something like system.math as a static server, because there's nothing in that particular class that can hurt me. So if I'm basically saying a request is a static method of math, and if it's there, I will run it with whatever other parts of the request. Easy. I can expose a whole .NET type with like this much code. If I wanted to do just an object route, though, it's basically if $object, you can actually use a sub-expression to see if a property exists. So I'm just saying if $object contains a property named the request URL local path, then I'll route it that way. I could keep a static object in there and just return it. I could have a PowerShell script block that it runs and return that. And running commands is actually very easy. We'll see the fancy example, but the short version of it is here. There is no route table. Your command name is your route. So if I want to serve up the home page, I make a command called /. That's it. If I want to serve up a virtual file, I make a command called /a.virtual.file. Also still it. I want to return a different content type there. Not too bad. This brings me to the life regrets portion. I wish I had realized this all years ago. I have been doing PowerShell web development now for about 15 years. I've written quite a few complex web tools in PowerShell. I am not the only one. I'm sure that at least a couple people in this room have used, say, Pode or PowerShell Universal. Maybe a few very old hats might remember Pipeworks, which was the OG PowerShell web framework that I wrote a long time back and have since basically abandoned. And I really wish I had seen this simple way sooner. Because one of the things that keeps coming up with each of the different framework-based approaches is like the limits of its customizability and the fear around a lack of understanding. If it's impossible for you to wrap your hand around how the server is working, it's kind of not really that possible to trust it, is it? Yeah. Beyond that, licensing costs are a very tricky thing in 2025. Well, they were probably a very tricky thing in 1995 too, just a different form of tricky. This brings me back to another mantra: techniques are greater than tooling. And again, I'm here to teach you techniques today. I don't want you to walk away like, oh, this is the cool tool that I can use to do this, and I have no idea how it works. I want you all to understand how to write whatever web server you can imagine. And this is why I'm teaching those techniques today, because I want everyone to see how simple it can be. Get a request, send a response. If you're getting annoyed with me saying that, please let me know. But I'm trying to hammer it home. Hopefully we now all understand how to write servers and scripts. But what about clients? This is going to be a little bit of another hammer to nail in and a brief history of client-side technologies and web. Let's talk about them though. Most of the time the client is a browser. Even the vast majority of apps nowadays aren't really. They're basically light shims around an internal browser. That's what an Electron app like Discord is. That's window dressing on a browser. So you could try to learn how to write the WinForms form of the thing, and the WPF form of the thing, and the Maui form of the thing, and the Tickle form of the thing, or you could learn how to write a web page. Web page is going to work about everywhere. My web page works on my car. Lucky for us, after 30 very long years, browser wars are finally over. They ended with little hurrah a few years back in Chromium 1. So unlike web development, perhaps the last time some of us considered it or looked at it, it's easier now because you don't have to code around 5 or 10 major types of browsers to work with. You just basically code to web standards and call it good. And we're going to learn about a few of those technologies very, very briefly. I am so sorry for the degree that this might be a review or history lesson, but we got to cover it sometime. Going in chronological order, we have HTML. Again, sorry, got to cover the basics. JavaScript, CSS, SVG, and for bonus points, ThreeJS. Now, I'm going to ask the room here before we go on, and we're going to come back to this in the last of these slides. How old do you think the youngest technology is on here? We're in chronological order, so how old do you think ThreeJS is? No cheating on your phone.
I'll be honest, I've never heard of it.
Cool. That's okay. 20 plus. I mean, not quite. So we've got a 20 and a 40. I don't think web development, actually no, 3D web development was possible in the 90s. There was this thing called VRML. It was crap. Sorry for anybody that was just scarred by that memory like me. But lucky for us, these are all text. We're going to come back to how young ThreeJS is in a second. You will be unpleasantly surprised, hopefully. HTML first. Stands for Hypertext Markup Language, just in case you need to win the trivia points. It is the way websites have always been written. I do mean always. Basically, the birth of HTML is the birth of the internet. Tim Berners-Lee, if I remember at CERN, it was first standardized in 1990. I was alive. I do feel old. I'm sorry. I realize that there are some people that might be younger than HTML, and I somewhat envy you, but somewhat don't. Pages are written in tags. Very, very basic page is going to be HTML, some header, some body, and close the HTML. HTML is also famously permissive in terms of badly balanced tags, mixed casing in tags, various things that other markup languages don't like, HTML does not care about. It is truly just text. Now, that's it. Now, raise your hand if you've written some PowerShell scripts that generate text. Okay. Raise your hand if you've taken an example from the internet, PowerShell or otherwise, and just popped it into a here string and added a PowerShell variable and written a function and called it a day. So this is really not rocket science. Any example you run into for HTML, for CSS, for SVG, we're going to come back to this. You can just go ahead and pop it into a PowerShell function and run it in a web server and generally call it a day. I don't think I'm covering it too deeply. I probably should stop and mention for each of these things. They should be returned with a content type. Text/HTML is HTMLs. But it is just text. So to make HTML in PowerShell, we just return strings. Everybody feel up to that task? Cool. Gonna make web developers out of at least a half room full of PowerShell people, and I'm so psyched. Been trying for years. Every other time that I'm talking about PowerShell and web development, it's like, I don't know, maybe. This looks scary. So keep making me feel like my life has been wasted here. Thank you. Put in a variable if you want, escape it if you need. You can go ahead and use the .NET classes to do that. There's even another one built into PowerShell Web, HTTP Utility, HTML and code. So if you need to escape it, just use .NET to do so. Nice and quick. JavaScript is probably going to be our most nebulous of them. This is the way we script the browser. It has almost always been the way we script the browser. There have been a couple of brief flirtations into using VBScript in the browser. They did not go well. If anybody does remember 90s internet, there were a lot of VBScript ActiveX attacks. And it was decided probably by around the end of the 90s that it was just generally not a good idea to have your full systems administration language supported in the browser with magic to talk to the host computer. That seemed like it wasn't a good plan. And I'm not trying to repeat that plan. I think that it might be nice to be able to translate PowerShell to JavaScript more easily, but overall, I don't think it is a good idea to try to have PowerShell be the language in the browser, because that can open up a lot more. Sending data to and from the browser, great. Using JavaScript in the browser to work with PowerShell REST APIs, great. Trying to embed the entirety of the PowerShell language in the browser is overkill and potentially risky, in my not humble opinion. First standardized in 1995. Yes, it has been that long. Yes, they did try VB-script before that. No, it was not a good idea then either. There was many, many reasons why Windows 95 did not last. That was probably the biggest one, though. It has grown a lot since then. In fact, it is now heavily standardized, and loath as I am to compliment other languages, it's actually a damn cool one. It's also probably one of the more similar to PowerShell languages that you're going to run into, because like PowerShell, JavaScript is based off of functions, variables, and extraordinary flexibility. Just there's no $sign before variables. That's your biggest thing. And there's no object pipeline per se. You could try to build one. You don't necessarily need to. But basically everything else feels close to the same. There are even some classes in .NET that are perhaps purposefully designed to be very similar to JavaScript. If not, it's not too hard to learn. And even if you don't know it, you're welcome to copy and paste other people's examples, tweak a little bit, call it a day. Nobody is going to hate you for this. That's what all the JavaScript developers that call themselves full stack are doing too. It is a very flexible language though, just like PowerShell. I can have objects that do about anything in JavaScript, and those objects can have properties named about anything. I could have written the incredible extensible JavaScript object too, because they are, just not quite in the same way. But it is, again, all just text. So copy and paste your example, party on, call it good. And we can write PowerShell that returns JavaScript. If you need this to actually be done server-side, you probably will want to return the right content type. You're going to sense a pattern here, although there's going to be one that throws us off. But the content type for JavaScript, what do you think it is going to be? Text/JavaScript. Almost as if the web development community is populated by a lot of people that no foolish people will be designing websites and are trying to make it easy for them too. So don't get any imposter syndrome about this. Everybody doing web dev is at least, that them Bowie. Just return a string, call it a day. So we all think we can write some JavaScript from PowerShell now too, right? Cool. Now, again, it can live in script tag or in its own file. If it's in its own file, you want to return it or make sure you give the content type of text JavaScript. But other than that, you're good. CSS, the fun one. Cascading style sheets, that's what it stands for. That's also probably one of the more, we could have a competition for which of these is the most opaque acronym. I don't personally get that much from cascading style sheets. The back half of it works. The cascading part is always a little bit trickier to explain. But it is the way we stylize a site. It is first standardized in 1996 because basically right as soon as people had JavaScript, people were like, I don't want to do everything in JavaScript, please. So we have CSS rules. These stylize portions of a page or types of elements, and they're written in rules. You'll normally have a portion called a selector, that's that sum rule portion, curly braces, and a series of attributes that you're setting. So in this case, I'm saying sum rule, which is a arbitrary CSS class. I can just say HTML, or let's say A or H1 space class equals sum rule, no dot. And then this will be picked up. Font size 2em means I want to make it twice as big, and font weight bold. So if you really want to write a rule like this in pure PowerShell, you can probably already see how you could do it, at least for one level of nesting. You literally just name of thing, curly brace, bunch of strings join. Or if you want to be extra special, go over a key and value in a hash table, key, colon, value, semicolon, next thing, key, colon, value, semicolon, next thing. A million ways to do this. I don't want anybody walking out of here thinking that there's a perfectly right or wrong answer, because that's just not the way this works. But I do want you all to realize it's easy. In fact, I would personally argue that CSS is the easiest thing to generate in pure PowerShell. And when we get to there is no route table again, you'll see a tiny little snippet of code that'll just turn hash tables and nested hash tables into CSS and calls it a day. But it is, again, still all just text. If you do any CSS already, you might have heard of a thing called a mixin. Has anybody heard of these? Yes? No? They're basically ways that people have built little templating languages on top of CSS to run a function to return CSS. And this is cool, sure, but I don't even need to do this. I just return a string. If I want a function to be a mixin, I just write a PowerShell function that is that mixin. And that's it. Sort of making sense? So it's like I figured out my massively cool drop shadow style. I can write that out in pure PowerShell as a mixin. I can have some parameters to it, like how much you want to drop the shadow. You can call that PowerShell function, it returns CSS, you're good. Okay? Put in a variable if you want, call a function if you want to customize. So everybody think they can write some CSS in PowerShell? Yes. Sweet. Except for you, you just got here. Next, not quite last, we're going to talk about SVG. I actually kind of love SVG at this point. Part of what led me back into a point of joy with PowerShell web development was writing some tooling that built a PowerShell function for everything in the SVG standard and just getting to the point where I could learn it via tab completion. And I'll show you some examples of that soon. But it stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. It is what's on the tin, but that's also a very techie way to put what's on the tin. Basically, it's the way we write vector graphics, not here's a series of pixels, but here's a series of lines and shapes to draw. It was first standardized in 1999. We all feel kind of old seeing these dates, right? Just at least a little bit. All right. Yeah, I am sometimes surprised how long various portions of the web have been stable. Graphics are written in XML. Like, that is a circle. Everybody could kind of make heads or tails of that, right? Circles easy, lines easy, rects easy. Path syntax, a bit of a nightmare. Polygons, just give it a bunch of points. But you have really primitive shapes that are just built into the browser. And you can composite more and more shapes on top of that. You can also do animations and filtering and all sorts of insane effects. You'll get a taste of that when we go to the brief examples demo end. But XML is still just text. So even though I have gone and written a whole framework / module to generate stuff with SVG, and I'll show you portions of that, there is no route table demo. That's just doing it by hand. Purely no frameworks. I do make that fun module though, and I've already talked about it like 4 times, so we're going to example land, and hopefully you'll like it. But this is a brief taste of things you can do in SVG written in PowerShell. Oh, it's jumping ahead of my coolness here. Scroll on down. So you've got some rounded corners animations, some color animations. That's moving faster than I like. Animations of shapes and motions, blurring, beat matching animations, morphing shapes, various circles, Perlin noise to animate clouds. So you can dynamically make noise functions in SVG. Drop shadows, embossing, fading in, good old hello world, hexagonal patterns, an index with an interactive link for each of the things, some animation of gradients. We're not even at the coolest parts yet, you'll know. A example of morphing shapes, moving gradient, pattern animation. Again, we're not quite to the cool yet, but we're getting there. Pattern masking. The PowerShell chevron, by the way, you can get it in a t-shirt form. Ask for a merch link later. I also have hoodies, and there are hats available if you really want to rock your PowerShell. Radial gradients and animations, and now we're into the cool area where we're actually just repeating shapes and doing animations for each of these things. This was written in PowerShell. In fact, I don't want to write this in SVG by hand. We can all agree this is much easier to do by script, right? In fact, I'm going to go see if I can look at the raw source of this for a second. Might be a little bit tricky. Yeah, I guess it'll let me show the code. I don't want to do that by hand. But I do want to go back and look at my repeated shapes script for a second. And actually, all of those repeated shapes were from the same script. And it is really just 70 lines of code that generates multiple hundreds of lines of code of beauty. And we're still not at the really cool one. Spirals. And then I have, at least this is my favorite. I call this the Doctor Strange demo. Now, the thing that I do personally love about this, about SVG, I'm just going to go, well, two things. I'm going to go Control-C my event server. I'm going to go invoke REST method the thing. Stars. First, I'm going to note that it is actually a real object coming back. So I could do something like select XML, get me all the nodes within that. That's nice. If I wanted to shift everything to the left or the right, I could do that programmatically. But no, the thing that to really love, this is, because we can divide by kilobytes in PowerShell, although we can all kind of see how short it is, less than 3.5 kilobytes. Now let's go to our crazy example. I think this was the thing. No. Yeah, let's use our hexagon here. That whole thing is 32 kilobytes. Infinite animation that's probably more beautiful than the smallest GIF. Throwing some deep shade side note here, GIF was not listed on this. It is technically a thing. You could generate GIFs in PowerShell. I don't want you to know how. I'm not going to teach you that much. I am going to rant about it for this much longer. First, it's created in 1989 by somebody at CompuServe, which is a company that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist anymore. Second, at me if you want, the person who created it named it after Jif peanut butter, so I believe that's how it's pronounced, according to the horse's mouth. And third, it is basically a frame-by-frame gzip of an image bitmap, which makes it an incredibly inefficient way to store video. An awful, awful format that just refuses to die. Which actually brings me back to another example not too far after this alphabetically, and I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit off the rails on this particular bit, but I really don't like GIFs. I don't hate them, but I don't like them. And so, with some animation, obviously a lot smaller than a GIF would be. Okay, so SVG is cool. Already plenty of examples of how you can build that in PowerShell, but it's also very important to note, as I was going to each of those examples, it wasn't like I had to rerun the script. It generated the file. Now it's up on GitHub and various static sites. That's it, end of story. Because at the end of the day, it's just XML, which is just text. And we can write text in PowerShell all day and all night. It's something PowerShell is exceedingly good at. It is great. SVG is great for shapes, animations, and filtering. I guess I didn't show any cool filter demos yet, but I should. Now, ThreeJS, and we're back at the punchline. So we had a 40 years old and 20 years old for ThreeJS. Any more guesses before we get to the moment of truth? 15? Okay. I should have designated a prize. It lets us write 3D in JavaScript. It is the de facto standard for 3D graphics in the browser. Technically, you can do this all manually with WebGL in JavaScript, but basically everybody uses ThreeJS. It has been here since 2010, so congratulations, right on the nose, at least for this year. But yeah, that's how long we've been able to do 3D in the browser. Raise your hand if you knew you could do 3D in the browser before this talk. Okay. But again, still JavaScript, still text. So still pretty easy to manipulate. They have many examples. Copy and paste and replace with variables as needed. For inspiration, check out their examples. I am especially fond of the ThreeJS periodic table. So far, so easy, right? Oh, okay, cool. I've seen a periodic table before. That's cool. So the thing that actually does kind of drive me nuts about knowing this exists and has been around for 15 years, and having obviously been a child of various forms in the 90s and 80s, doesn't this look like the movie interfaces we were promised our whole life? And we could have done this at least the last 15 years. Let's get on this, right? If I view source on this, it's actually quite clever. Although I probably should have done this in a more optimal format. But yada-yadaing away through a lot of the stuff, they literally have a table, of the periodic table, in there, in line. You could have your own data, convert to JSON, and use the same thing, knocking out the periodic table for whatever you choose. It is not incredible rocket science to do our own data binding here or our own creation of 3D user interfaces in PowerShell. Let no one say I do things half-assed. Actually, I totally do. Back on there. So 3JS is cool. All these client language or technologies are cool. They're all very stable. You can build upon them without fear. They're not going anywhere. In fact, if they did go anywhere, various portions of the internet would get very ornery and complain. So, with all that in mind, are we ready to go back to there is no route table and see how it's actually working? All right. Going to go top to bottom and see how it works. It looks like I also have about 40 minutes. And I think I'm about halfway through on slides, so we'll see. Control home. Oh, of course, I have FN lock on, so I guess we're going back home the old way. Sorry. I'm not actually running this right now. Actually, technically, I'm still running the server. I'm just not responding to it right now. But I'll start up a new one in a second. Again, we've got the same boilerplate of creating our background job, creating our event pump, and generating out these events. Remember, we can have a PowerShell function named anything. So our home page is just /. Why not, right? I mean, there's a bit of that, but I feel like it's so wrong it's right. And if you wanted to universally qualify it, all right. You don't have to have it named /. It's just the easiest, quickest thing to route. You don't have to expose it as a function, period. I always feel bad. But I also feel so damn good. Like when I can take a variable, like a refresh interval, and because I'm getting this first, that refresh interval is going to remain constant for all of the remaining requests. So when I want my shape morph in my SVG to take the exact amount of time as it will take to refresh the page, even though that's randomized, I can do that. So wrong it's right. Speaking of so wrong it's right, this is one way of writing little HTML inline. I'm doing it with, more than one string. I'm just literally taking bits and pieces of HTML, throwing them in, and joining them by new lines. There are a million ways to do this. I probably demonstrate like 5 of them in this, but you can construct strings in PowerShell whatever way you want. Hopefully that is not where you're going to be experiencing the majority of your time drag. I guess I will start rerunning it at this point, because I want to start going to some of these. So I have a function hello world. I'm going to go open this up. It's going to start giving me back my feed of returns, but I'm going to ignore that, and I'm just going to go over to hello world. Now I'm doing a little bit of magic in this one because I am just basically taking the return of this function, and I'm doing the part where I respond with that. Just a teeny bit of magic. But it makes life easier, and I can do something like a random number generator too. Because I have aliases in PowerShell, if I want to expose additional endpoints for the same command, just set an alias. I'm actually going to note one other thing on the so wrong it's right category. Have you ever, on your boxes in your life, seen commands named starting with slash? So even though PowerShell's been able to do this all this time, it's not like people are sitting around there throwing in functions that are going to show up in your web server. And you can control what functions are loaded in your run space by choosing what modules are loaded, not having a profile. So I kind of hear you, but as long as I don't have a polluted run space, this is absolutely fine. And it's just quick, short, simple, and logical. I can also return a request info object here. So I can use this to inspect what I'm passing just for debugging purposes. I had given a talk about this about a week ago. 8 weeks ago. And part of one person's takeaway was, oh, this is a great educational tool for figuring out how web stuff works. And sure, I'll take that. You can use it that way if you want. Can also go ahead and get my process. Now, I'm not going to actually return all the JSON for this, but I am going to return some, which is obviously not going to change too much by requests, but it's literally just calling get process and piping into select object. And then at the end of the day saying, oh, it's not a string, go convert it to JSON, return it as JSON. Everybody think they can write a little JSON endpoint in PowerShell now? Yeah? Good. Now we get to the fun stuff. Dynamic CSS. First, pick a random background color. Yes, this works. Second, just because this is good color trickery to know, if you want the opposite of a color, XOR the color. Now, you wouldn't necessarily always want an aesthetic randomized background color. I get that. But it's a demo for effect here. So we're going to get a formatted version of this. That's the hexadecimal form of the color. And here's that magic bit of CSS conversion. Hey, is the current object a string? Cool. Is it a dictionary? Cool. Go over each of the keys. If the value is a dictionary, convert that value to CSS and put that in a key and a rule. Otherwise, rule. And that's me returning the CSS. Cool. Again, great way to learn and experiment if you want. Ignore this endpoint, for I did not finish adding to it before I actually put this up. Sorry. we're going to go to the SVG endpoint. And I could still do better with this. I keep meaning to make it closer to those like repeated shapes animations, but I didn't want to use any dependent framework for it. So I got lazy and didn't put the math in line. But what we're doing is taking our random background and foreground color, setting a random fill and random stroke. Forgot to mention this, but this is the one exception to the rule. It's text/CSS, text/HTML, text/JavaScript, image/SVG plus XML. It bothers me too, but I understand. And we're basically picking a random background and foreground, setting a random fill and a random stroke, ignoring a couple lines of code, picking a bunch of random points centered around the center, and creating a color animation to fade one to the other, and putting this all into one shape directly. So in this case, I'm giving it a full screen width and height, but a view box. That is how much actual space the original image has of 100 by 100. Putting a circle dead center in that, using that random stroke color, using a stroke width of 3, filling, adding the color animation, and then having my path. It is possible to morph things in SVG from one thing to another. All you need to do is animate the property. So in the case of path, you animate D. In the case of polygon, you animate points. And we are done with our SVG endpoint. Morphing image. Randomized color. Synchronized animations. Cool. Everybody think they could hack away at these, X number of lines of code? This one looks like 157 to 201. So less than 50 lines here, less than 50 lines there. Each of these things is fairly simple, hopefully. I don't think I'm going to demonstrate this one, partially because I don't know if I have any media files on this that I care to share, and also because copyright concerns and recordings and the like. But, I went a little bit all out, and I went and created a media server too. So I'm going to go parse the query string here, and if it has a file that's in the query string, I'm going to get item that file. This is a very insecure media server. Going to give you a 404 if there was no file. If there was a file, I'm going to pick a content type if it supported it. And if it doesn't support that particular extension, I'm going to return a 415, which basically says I will not give you that content type. Yes, please. I mean, it's really more audio and video here, but also I think I've established that I don't particularly care for GIF. No, I'm making GIFs in PowerShell, just, I don't want to use them if I have the choice about it. If you had a butter smooth animation in a GIF, which would you choose? More aliasing, so we expose audio and video. Probably want to add an audio player and video player to this. And I really should have copied this demo onto my laptop, but then I'd be back at the copyright concerns. Did you know you can do audio visualization inside of a web page? Yeah. So I have a demo at home that's literally like, browse to this file, pick this MP3. Here is oscilloscope, here is bar graph. Bonus points matching various color schemes. Oh, I should talk about color schemes. We'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so in the abstract, hopefully we understand how the file server portion works. And now we get to the crazy part, the 3D scene, which still has too much junk code in it. But basically I'm saying I want to create a number of shapes, and I want to create between 1 and 16 shapes. I don't know what kind of shape, so for each shape I'm going to pick a random shape, Then for each random shape, I'm going to pick a number of random points for that shape. And then I'm going to pick a random material and a random color. At this point, I'm just going for broke. I'm going to randomly decide whether some of them are wireframes or not. And let's go to our 3D endpoint there for a second. So this is dynamically creating JavaScript with way too much randomization in it to make a bunch of 3D shapes in PowerShell. And as you can see, responsive enough. Now, I'm not going to ask if everybody can do that one right out of the gate, because I believe that is a little bit more of a head trip. But I will view source on one of these and see what a head trip looks like, hopefully. Sources, blah, 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 blah. There is the script generated. We've got our title, we've got our style, which gets rid of our body margin, and we've got our import map, which basically says where we can go grab JavaScript from without it complaining. And then we have our ThreeJS here, which is basically what we're returning from the PowerShell. So 200 lines in this case. Oh yeah, it's picking a different distance and rotation too each time, I think. So yeah, PowerShell in 3D. Or 3D in PowerShell, I don't know. You tell me. Cool. I was trying to make it more fun in orbiting. I didn't use the CSS rendering yet. I do have some light scene animation goes on. I think it rotates the whole thing a little bit. Yeah, it rotates each of the things a bit. But yeah, it's just creating strings, combining them, and we can do whatever we want. This is the actual whole page. And this time I am using HereDoc. For bonus points, I'm using getCulture so that I match the locale of the server when I'm giving it to you. Now, pay it forward. Be international. Actually, this is probably something I want to pause on for a brief second. One of the cool things about PowerShell as a web language, and there are many, is that it has localization built in. PSD1 files are inherently localized. So, if you wanted to build a server that supports multiple locales in pure JavaScript, this is a bit of a stretch. Ironically, SVG is good at localization too, but most things in web are not. PowerShell can make that a lot easier for you. And again, we're back at our watching for events bit. Here I'm going to do a little bit more complicated stuff. To make things a little bit faster, I'm actually going to pre-get commands, although, yeah, no, I'm going to check for a script variable this whole, and do this once. Then I'm going to go take the segments and put them together in fun ways just to show all the different ways I could have a fallback here, but only picking the one that's done me the most proud so far, which is the local path. I could be routing on the full qualified URL if I wanted to, which, does that make you feel better if it's https myservername.com/ better, worse, just as evil? Tar and feather me if you need. But basically we go check, does a command exist for this route? If one does, cool. If I map to command, I run the command. I know. Again, we get a request. We give a response. Hopefully not rocket science. I am looking for some specific content types in the type names. If I wanted to let it automatically describe itself, like the CSS, I could also have that endpoint manually set it. If the result's an int and it's within the range of error codes, well, that's my status code. All set, right? So if I want to return a 404, that will return the 404. If it's a string, go return that. If it's bytes, go return that. If it's a file, this is where we get a little fancy, start a thread job, because I can have a thread job within a thread job, or for that matter, multiple thread jobs in my main run space, to return that file. The reason I'm doing it this way is that you want to not block that main thread for long-running requests, and a file, like a video file, will be a long-running request, especially if they do that the right way in the browser, where they're actually sending back information about where they're at in the video. And for those following along or struggling to, this little chunk of code is all that is required for streaming video. What happens when you stream video is that you get an accept ranges header on the request for the video. It's like, I'm going to accept some bytes starting at this location, potentially going to that location. And it's going to basically be like, I want this bunch of video. I'll take the next bunch of video. I'll take the next bunch of video. And so you're not actually supposed to return the whole video. You return a chunk and a chunk and a chunk. And that's all this code is doing. Unless, of course, I don't have that, in which case it's just fine. I'll copy it to the response stream and call it a day there too. And I close the response, and I close the file, and I dispose of the file. If I don't know what the result is at this point, I'll convert it to JSON. And again, I am done. We're at line 526. So just to recap, possibly with less bated breath, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, including in 3D, and an SVG, and a file server for audio and video. And I'm not even going to start adding more fingers for the number of different codecs, because I don't have that many fingers because I'm not a mutant. All on about 500 lines code. With, quite frankly, extra filler code that I should have ripped out. So, do we all feel like PowerShell could do basically anything any other web language could do now? Do we maybe even start to get the idea that it might be able to do more than other web languages can do? Cool. Back to the main event then. Some storage stuff. I had to get boring sometime, right? But I promise I'll be brief. Sorry. We haven't talked too much about storage. Why? Because LOL, nobody cares. You probably know it already. For NoSQL storage, 9 out of 10 times it's a REST API. Raise your hand if you've called a REST API in PowerShell before. So you already know how to store objects persistently in PowerShell then, right? There's nothing to learn. We use invoke REST method or a function or a commandlet that somebody uses to store. And I think a lot of people here might be using some cloud services. Azure and AWS make many of these commandlets. So the chances are you're not actually going to need to write any of your own storage logic, at least anything that complicated. You're just going to plug parameters into what's there. But hey, if you really need to use SQL, I do actually have a whole other talk that I gave virtually for SQL Conf earlier this year called SQL and PowerShell for the Win. Covers just the basics. I'm not going to go too far into it now. We're going to cover the 3-step process. It is create a connection, execute a query, close the connection. Sorry, I probably could have gotten that down in 2 steps if I tried. But yeah, it's just tiny amount of .NET code. Tiny little PowerShell script that can go run SQL. Everybody can learn it. Easy to look up online. A million ways to die in the West. Static sites are also very easy. We have just learned how to write a dynamic page, a very dynamic one, possibly too dynamic of a page. Tell me if you think so. But static sites are much, much easier. We just generate files. Again, that's it. We just saw how to generate each of these types of files in a dynamic context. It is the same thing. If we wanted to take those functions and redirect them into a file, we can. I'm a fan of two naming conventions. And these are naming convention techniques. These are not the only ones you're limited to. You could do whatever you'd like, but these are the two that I'm finding click for me. You're welcome to give feedback and say this does or doesn't work for you, or you prefer this one to that one. I actually am very curious which one clicks more for most. First one is name of file.extension.ps1, like index.html.ps1, which you could run and generate with this beautiful one-liner. So run it, redirect it to itself, or redirect it to itself minus ps1. Gettable? Understandable? Cool. The other one is function URL and file name, like mycoolwebsite.com, which no, I do not own. I really need to pick one that I do. Index.html, ... So whatever the hell I want in that function, and I can do the same redirection trick there. Now, looking at them side by side, which one do you prefer? Just gut reaction, don't overthink it. Okay, everybody name a file? Okay, note it. Main moral though is stick it in a workflow and call it a day. Or, you know what, don't stick it in a workflow. Just go ahead and upload the files yourself. Check them into a repository, check the box on GitHub pages. You've got a GitHub page. Not rocket science. In closer to rocket science and much more fun, hopefully edge of inspiring, let's talk about app protocol and PowerShell. Who knows what app protocol is? Okay. So PowerShell has always been a great web language. Why? Because everything is an object in PowerShell. In fact, this isn't something we're really harping on here, but that's its big strength in a web context, is I can wait until the last possible second to return it as the content type you want. I could represent something and have it be rendered as HTML or CSS or SVG or any number of content types, basically by changing what I'm piping it to. Easy enough, right? We can display that object any way we want. We can format objects in PowerShell. It's great. The web is becoming more object-oriented by the day. You may have heard of app protocol, although my earlier survey indicates no, you have not. You probably have heard of Blue Sky, the main app built on it. Have you all heard of Blue Sky? Is everybody on Blue Sky yet? You should get on Blue Sky. It's fun. But app protocol is a protocol for objects. And the way Blue Sky works on a fundamental level, it is just basically an object pipeline of human thought. It's what people are posting everywhere, all going into a web server, all being distributed over a WebSocket. And it is a hell of an opportunity, hell of a moment in time. Okay, work with me here for a second. We're going to do some quick app protocol demos. First, the WebSocket module. Okay, there is one or two tools that I'll show. This is a PowerShell module I wrote to work with WebSockets, because I'm starting to be much more obvious with my naming. Maybe I'm getting lazy, perhaps. Let's go to this PowerShell window here, clear the screen. I'll come back to that one in a second. But import the WebSocket module. Pasting that, and I actually want to do a maximum number of things here because I don't want this to be just pulling all the bandwidth forever, but let's go for a maximum of 1,000 posts. That's just what the whole world is posting right now. Maybe should have gone for less than 1,000, but it's probably not going to take it that long to get there. I'm regretting my decisions immediately. There it is. Okay. These are all basically built-in examples to the WebSocket module. It is technically get WebSocket, but I'm, again, getting to be a bigger and bigger fan of obvious naming. So we're going to do a fun one. We're going to watch for, try to do a fun one and then have the demo gods be cruel. Here, grab that again. Yes. And we're going to do a maximum again of 1 kilobyte. And we're going to grab all of the posts and we're going to watch for 2 different conditions. One of them is matches a hashtag. The other one is matches an emoji, which you have no idea how much Googling it took to find out that this was the way to match emoji. A lot. But I will take no responsibility for anything that pops on the screen in the next X number of seconds. Random people on the internet do not care about the feelings of people watching a demo halfway across the world. Okay. So object pipeline of human thought, for better or worse. And you can tap into it in PowerShell with basically a one-liner. Persistently, I might add. I'll come back to that one. I'll show the one that I already had open. Starting basically at the beginning of Summit. If you wanted to, whip out your phones and try in a second, we can actually show this one. Let me go to github.com, start automating at PowerShell Summit. Sure, I'll go to the actions. We'll see if we have got one running right now. We do. Who wants to whip out their phone, take a photo, and, post something to Blue Sky? You've got approximately 1 minute and 20 seconds to do this before this round of aggregation finishes up. It's okay. Just shout it out when you have, and we're going to see how quickly it pops up. Whoever decides to. You just have to use the words PowerShell and Summit, or actually PowerShell space or no space Summit in your post. I may not wait for people much longer. Is anybody close to having posted? Oh, there we go. So, congratulations, your post was picked up basically before you could put your phone down. This is a GitHub action aggregating everything related to PowerShell Summit and putting it into a GitHub repository, which I will now pull because I haven't done that on this box in the past day or so. Cool. Having done that, also grabbing photos, let's do something that's only moderately dangerous. Let's see how many people have posted photos. Oh, more Hitchhiker Guide refs. We're going to go ahead and get a random photo. What? It's just Travel Piggy. Shame Stephen wasn't here to see it. That isn't Jeffrey Snover. I think most of the photos are going to have something of that character. Yes, it seems like we're detecting a pattern here. If I go look at how this is actually structured, I have a directory here, and it is literally just, this is who's posting. These are the files they posted. These are the images. Okay. Now, we already saw how long in terms of PowerShell code it was to create beautiful things. Does anybody want to take a guess? I mean, you can kind of see the file sizes. How many lines of code do you think we got in here? Oh, is it going to open an ISE? I'm going to feel bad. No, that's not right. Okay. I'm going to go open this in code. Control-C, code at PowerShell Summit, at PowerShell Summit, WebSocket PS1. So a little bit longer than the cool graphics, but way shorter than the trippy server. A little bit less than 125 lines. Almost from scratch. So you want to build your own static site that's constantly updated by social media. You can do this in a very, very small amount of code. You can also let people see the fire hose. And that is what Groovity is. This is literally all the memes, plus all the emoji, plus all the hashtags. And I got to say, I still have growth in terms of web design, definitely. And this site still has growth, but it also has a hell of a lot of potential. I built this over the weekend. We thought TikTok was going to die. So I was like, oh, I'll build something that's basically like TikTok times 10 because of the number of different channels. And then TikTok didn't die. And then I was like, well, that was a kind of fun weekend, but doesn't really actually have much promise. But I'll come back to it. That is all purely client, by the way. There is no server. That is a static page being shown to you. Because part of the joy of truly full stack PowerShell is learning when to or not to actually have a server. There's a default setting a lot of people who do full stack end up in, which is I know this framework and it'll do things for me this way, so I'll build this part in the server and I'll build this part in the client. Full stack PowerShell, you actually go through a lot more thought process of what do I want to be just on the client and what do I want to be just on the server, and you can generate them both consistently, but learn each of their technologies individually. Now it looks like, by the way, it did finish updating the @PowerShell Summit stuff, so let's go back to that repository. I should be able to git pull again. And yep, 2 more posts. Thank you. I also am only mildly disappointed in terms of I did not expect that number, but I also thought there would be more posts about PowerShell Summit during PowerShell Summit. Oh well, we can be more lively. Back to the main talk, if I can ever get back to it. Did it somehow magically stop the presentation? No. But we are on to the second to last slide, I believe. Oh yeah, and 7 minutes from the end of time, so perfect. Let's talk about the brave blue yonder. That protocol is trying to build a better internet. Much like PowerShell was founded by a bunch of somewhat weird idealists with hopes of making a more cohesive, automated world. @Protocol is trying to build an internet that is standards and protocols based, is open, and doesn't suck quite so much. And I think we can all agree it's gotten to a kind of annoying point. We can help make it better. In fact, I would highly encourage you all to try to help make it better. It is a unique moment in time and opportunity because it only happens, it's only happened like 4 or 5 times in the history of the internet where there's enough upheaval in customer segments and offerings out there that a whole new growth of tools comes out and a whole bunch of changes roll throughout the internet. And I feel like we're very close to the cusp of that at this point. It's either basically fix it or more and more people go home. So this is a unique moment of opportunity to fix the World Wide Web. I would like everybody's help with PowerShell and @Protocol. It is a very efficient way to handle this particular set of needs. And even though we were just showing you posts, @Protocol can be any type of object we imagine. So if we were to define they call it a lexicon for server status, we could make downtime notifications standardized across the entire ecosystem. Think about how nice that might be. Think about how many different places you have to go just to ask, is this website up? Think about how many basically property bag scenarios you have that are poorly served by a lot of companies and could stand for some standardization. So please pick a problem in the World Wide Web and try to fix it. Ask for help if you need. Never doubt that a small dedicated group of nerds can change the world. It is the only thing that ever has. Nerds basically being new parlance around an old Margaret Mead quote that's probably been true for millennia. We all have the capability to do interesting and amazing web development with PowerShell. Hopefully in this talk you've learned the basic fundamentals of how to approach this space, and you maybe, hopefully, have gotten some inspiration about what you might be able to do there. And the more the merrier. The more people dedicated to trying to build a better internet right now, the more we have a chance of seeing this through in a positive way. So I don't know anybody's stripes or inclinations, but I do know the internet is much more broken than it was in 2010, ThreeJS aside. So please help. Go off with me into the brave blue yonder and see what we can do. Questions, comments, and socials. I'll come back to the questions bit in a second. I'll throw the socials up there in case anybody needs them. I did not get the QR code for speaker feedback, but please fill it out, if only to say that I sucked. We have a few minutes for questions. In fact, we have exactly 3 minutes for questions. What do you got? I have one for you all, like having gone through this journey. Does this feel understandable? Cool. And is this a marked change from walking into this room? Cool. That means that after 15 years of looking, I finally found the easy way to do this. Because it can't possibly be so-and-so built a tool and that made it easy and took away all my understanding of the thing. Because the person who builds that tool passes, then, everybody's back to square one. But even if I've taken a couple dozen people and helped them understand the fundamentals of how the internet works and how to build any kind of site in PowerShell, if you can all get it, it gives me a lot of hope. Because going back to the kind of the problem space of the now, there are not that many people that actually understand as much as you now do about web development. Most people do know their framework and nothing else. The whole web is suffering from this because it's very hard to find people who can, say, transform data from one thing to the other or migrate things or build good tooling. And us people in PowerShell land, we've been building good tooling for years. We are good at that. So they need to collectively learn some of the skill sets we already have. And all that's really required is that we can get a little understanding of how this actually works. If we come at it from this nice raw level, the hope is that we can actually understand more deeply than most web developers ever could. So thank you for coming to my not TED Talk. I believe that takes us to 5, if only because they're doing applause in the other room. More questions or comments? Thank you.